My dear child, there is a woman in your life right now who needs something from you. And I did not come tonight to add another burden to a person who is already carrying more than their frame was designed to sustain. I came to reveal that the help she needs from you is the act that breaks the cycle your prayers have been aimed at breaking, because the well you have been protecting from use is a well that refills fastest when water is being drawn from it. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to reveal is not about giving more when you have nothing left. This is about a well, a specific, underground connected, deeper than the surface level. The reserves are beneath the level you have been measuring. Well whose water supply operates on a mechanism the protecting has been preventing from activating. A mechanism that connects the well to its deepest reserves only when something is being drawn from it. The well is not empty. The well is stagnant, and stagnant is not the same as dry. You have been focused inward, not from selfishness, from depletion. The specific, I have been running on empty for so long that looking outward feels like a luxury. My reserves cannot afford depletion. That narrows a person's spiritual vision to the circumference of their own life. When the capacity to look beyond the circumference has been consumed by the effort of sustaining what is inside it. My beloved child, the narrowing was survival, not sin. But the narrowing has been producing a secondary effect the survival did not intend. The well that was being protected from use has been sitting unused long enough that the water level is dropping, not from overuse but from the stagnation the protecting is producing. The well is losing water, not because someone is drawing from it, because no one is. Stay here. What I reveal next is who this woman is, and why helping her is not the burden your depletion says it is, but the pressure differential that connects your well to reserves it has been sitting above the entire time. Type well is stagnant if you have been focused inward from depletion rather than selfishness. Protecting a well you believed was nearly empty, and God just told you the water level is dropping not from use but from the stagnation the protecting is producing. And the act of drawing water is the mechanism that connects the well to deeper reserves. It has been sitting above the entire time. The protecting was preventing the connection from activating. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The well was never designed to hold water by keeping it. The well was designed to hold water by moving it, because the underground source the well is connected to operates on a pressure differential that is activated by drawing rather than by storing. And a well that stores without drawing loses the connection to the source the drawing was always designed to maintain. My beloved child, I need you to understand how your well actually works. A surface-level understanding of a well says, water is finite. Drawing reduces the supply. Protecting preserves what remains. The surface-level understanding is what the depletion installed as the governing logic of a person whose season of running on empty produced the specific, I must conserve what little is left. Every draw from this well is a reduction I cannot afford protective posture that has been governing the well's usage for the duration of the depleted season. The surface-level understanding is wrong. And wrong understanding protecting a well produces stagnation rather than preservation. My dear one, an underground connected well does not operate on surface logic. The water in the well is not the well's total supply. The water in the well is the visible portion of a supply whose invisible reserves are stored beneath the well at a depth the surface measurement cannot detect. The visible water is the access point. The invisible reserves are the source, and the connection between the access point and the source is maintained by the drawing. The specific water being pulled from the visible level creates a pressure differential that pulls fresh water up from the invisible reserves mechanism that only activates when something is being drawn from the well. No drawing, no pressure differential, no connection to the reserves. That has been the stagnation. This message was not released for everyone who feels depleted. This was aimed at the one person whose specific, season-long, inward-focused, protecting the well from any further drawing depletion has been producing the stagnation that is disconnecting the well from the underground reserves. The well was always sitting above. The person who does not know that the protecting is producing the emptying the protecting was designed to prevent. Type protecting is emptying if the well was designed to hold water by moving it rather than by storing it, and the protecting that was preventing any drawing has been disconnecting the well from the underground reserves the drawing was designed to connect it to, meaning the stagnation is producing the emptying the protecting was aimed at preventing, because a well that stores without drawing loses the pressure differential that pulls fresh water up from invisible reserves the surface measurement cannot detect. I have been watching the well stagnate since the protecting began, and the watching has been the specific ache of a God who designed the well's underground connection, and who has been standing beside a well whose mechanism requires drawing to activate. While the person guarding the well has been preventing the drawing, the mechanism needs to connect the visible water to the invisible reserves it has been sitting above, my dear one. Not from beneath the well monitoring the reserves at the source level, from beside you, at the well's edge, watching the water level drop from a position where both the dropping and the cause of the dropping are visible. Seeing the stagnation producing the evaporation, the person at the well is attributing to overuse when the well has not been used in seasons. I have been at the well's edge, watching the wrong diagnosis produce the wrong treatment. My beloved child, I watched the specific season the protecting began. There was a period, a specific identifiable, the season took more than it gave back period, where the depletion reached the threshold that converted the well's posture from open and drawing to closed and protecting. The conversion was not dramatic, it was gradual. The first refusal to draw was small, the second was slightly larger, and by the time the protecting became the default posture, the person guarding the well could no longer remember the last time anything was drawn from it, by anyone, including themselves. The well closed gradually, and gradually closed wells feel like they have always been closed. I chose you for this message because the woman I am pointing you toward right now is not a random person with a random need arriving at a random time. She is the specific person whose specific need requires the specific water your specific well contains. And the drawing she will perform on the well is the specific draw that will create the pressure differential that reconnects the well to the underground reserves the stagnation has been disconnecting it from. My child, she is not a burden arriving at a depleted well. She is the draw the well has been needing, and her need is the mechanism's activation. Type she is the draw if God has been at the well's edge, watching the stagnation produce the dropping that the protecting was attributing to overuse. And the woman being pointed to right now is not a random person with a random need, but the specific person whose specific drawing from the well, the activation, the mechanism requires to reconnect the visible water to the invisible reserves. Stagnation has been disconnecting because her need is the pressure differential the well has been needing, and her drawing is what connects the well to what it has been sitting above. I know what the depleted season has been doing to the specific part of you, where your capacity to look beyond your own needs is maintained, my beloved child. The capacity was not always narrow. There was a season, before the depletion reached its current depth, where the looking outward was natural. The specific, I have enough to extend. I can see beyond my own circumference. Someone else's need is something. I have the capacity to engage quality of a person whose well was being drawn from regularly enough that the connection to the underground reserves was active, and the supply was being replenished at the rate the drawing was consuming it. The looking outward was sustainable when the well was connected. And connected wells produce people who can see past the circumference of their own needs. The connection stalled, the looking outward narrowed, and narrowed vision in a depleted person is not selfishness. It is the well's surface level governing the person's range. My child, I watched the narrowing happen through the accumulation of unreplenished draws. The season that took more than it gave back was a season of drawing without the mechanism refilling. Not because the mechanism was broken, but because the draws were being performed under conditions that did not create the pressure differential the refilling requires. The draws were consumptive. The draws were crisis draws, emergency extractions of water performed under the pressure of immediate need, rather than the rhythm of regular drawing that the pressure differential is designed to respond to. Crisis draws deplete without replenishing. Rhythmic draws replenish while drawing. I watch the depletion produce the specific body level. I have nothing left for anyone else. My own needs are consuming the last of what the well contains. Exhaustion that converts a formerly outward-looking person into a person whose entire awareness is aimed at the water level inside their own well. The conversion was the depletion's product, not the person's character. And the conversion has been producing the narrowed vision the person has been experiencing as the permanent condition of a well they believe is running dry. The well is not running dry. The well is missing the mechanism, and the mechanism is the drawing. The deepest wound the depleted season produced was not the narrowed vision. It was the specific, private, never confessed guilt of knowing someone else needs help and feeling incapable of providing it, producing the quiet shame of a person who was once the one others drew from, and who now cannot look at another person's need without the looking producing the specific. I used to be someone who could help. I am not that person right now. The well that once supplied others cannot supply itself. Grief that a formerly generous person carries when the depletion has converted the giver into the person who needs to be given to. My dear child, you grieve the giver you were, not the giving, the giver. The specific, I was someone who saw needs and met them. I was someone whose well was a place people came to. I was someone whose capacity extended past my own circumference identity, that the depletion retired when the well's surface level dropped below the line where extending outward was sustainable. The retirement was not chosen. The retirement was produced by the dropping, and produced retirements grieve differently from chosen ones. My beloved child, I watched the grief produce its most devastating effect at the specific intersection of the woman's need and the viewer's incapacity. There is a moment that may be recurring right now, where the person sees the woman's need and feels the specific, I should be able to help. I used to be able to help. I cannot help, because the well is empty collision between the former giver's instinct and the current depletion's reality. The collision produces the shame, and the shame produces the looking away. My dear one, the looking away from the woman's need is not coldness. It is the specific. It hurts more to see a need I cannot meet than to not see it at all. Self-protection that a depleted former giver performs when the seeing of the need activates the giver instinct the depletion has, made unmeetable. The looking away is the depletion's management of the giver's pain, not the absence of the giver's heart. The heart is still there, the well is still there, and the looking away is about to become the looking toward, because what I am about to reveal changes what the well actually contains. Type giver, still in me, if the depletion retired the giver you were. And the looking away from the woman's need is not coldness, but the self-protection of a former giver, whose seeing of a need activates an instinct the depletion has made unmeetable, producing the shame of someone who used to be the well others drew from, and who now cannot look at another person's need without grieving the giver the depletion retired. And the giver's heart is still there beneath the depletion, and what God is about to reveal changes what the well actually contains. The well was never empty. The well was stagnant. And stagnant and empty are two completely different conditions that produce identical sensations at the surface level while operating on entirely different realities beneath it. My beloved one, I need to permanently separate the sensation of emptiness from the condition of emptiness. Your system classified the well as empty because the surface level dropped below the line where the drawing felt sustainable. The truth is, the surface level dropped because the stagnation was producing evaporation. The specific water sitting without moving loses volume through the surface. The stillness is the loss mechanism. The protecting is producing the dropping evaporation that a well undergoes when no drawing is being performed, and the water that remains has no movement to prevent the surface level loss the stagnation generates. The surface dropped from stagnation, not from emptiness, and the two require opposite treatments. My child, an empty well requires filling. A stagnant well requires drawing. The treatments are opposite. A person who treats a stagnant well as empty will attempt to fill what needs to be drawn from, adding more from the outside when the solution is activating what is already underneath. And a person who has been trying to fill a stagnant well from the outside through receiving, through praying for more, through waiting for the replenishment the empty diagnosis says is needed, is a person applying the wrong treatment to the wrong condition because the diagnosis was wrong. The diagnosis was stagnant. The treatment was drawing. And the wrong diagnosis produced the wrong treatment for the entire depleted season. My dear one, every prayer for replenishment that was aimed at filling an empty well was a prayer being applied to the wrong condition. The well was never empty. The well was sitting above reserves. The stagnation was preventing the well from accessing. And the reserves do not arrive through filling from the outside. The reserves arrive through drawing from the inside, the specific pressure differential. The drawing pulls fresh water up mechanism, whose activation requires the opposite of what the empty diagnosis was prescribing. The prescription was filling. The treatment was drawing. And the woman's need is the draw the treatment requires. The underground reserves just responded to something. And the specific, deep beneath the surface, the water table shifted. Something in the reserve's just movement that is occurring beneath the well right now is the first evidence that the mechanism is preparing to activate, because the pressure differential the drawing produces is approaching the well from a direction the protecting was never positioned to prevent. My beloved child, something shifted within the last few days, not in the depletion, in the well. The specific, almost imperceptible, something beneath me just stirred. The reserves I did not know where there are, producing a sensation the surface level has never generated shift that a well produces when the underground reserves detect the proximity of a draw that has not yet occurred, but whose approaching creates a pre-activation response in the reserves that are connected to the mechanism the drawing triggers. Something stirred beneath the surface, and stirring reserves mean the draw is approaching. My dear one, I need you to understand what happens beneath a well when the mechanism is preparing to activate. The reserves do not wait passively for the drawing to begin. The reserves respond to the proximity of the draw, the specific. The draw is approaching. The mechanism's about to be triggered. The reserves are pre-positioning for the upward movement preparation that the underground force performs when the person whose drawing will create the pressure differential is approaching the well the reserves are connected to. The reserves are pre-positioning because the woman is approaching. I have been managing the reserves behind every season of the stagnation, while the protecting was preventing the drawing, and the evaporations was dropping the surface level, and the depletion was narrowing the vision I was beneath the well. Maintaining the reserves, keeping the underground source connected, ensuring the pressure differential mechanism remained functional. Despite the extended period of non-activation the protecting was producing. My child, the mechanism is functional. The reserves are full. The underground source has been waiting, and the woman whose need is approaching the well is the draw the mechanism has been waiting to respond to. Type reserves stirring if something shifted beneath the surface within the last few days. A stirring the surface level has never produced, and the movement is the underground reserves, pre-positioning for the upward pull the drawing mechanism is about to generate, because the woman whose need is approaching the well is the draw the reserves have been waiting to respond to, meaning the mechanism remained functional during the entire stagnation, and the reserves beneath the well are full, and the pre-positioning is the evidence that the draw is approaching, and the connection is about to be reactivated. Chosen ones, this woman needs your help right now, and God is asking you. The title carries the word asking rather than commanding, because the God who is standing at the well beside the person guarding, it is not demanding the drawing, but is extending a sacred invitation to a person. He trusts enough to ask specifically, knowing the asking is landing on a depleted person, whose depletion makes the asking feel heavier than the asking was designed to feel. My dear one, I need you to understand the weight of the phrase God is asking you. The title does not say God is telling you, does not say God is requiring you. Says asking. Asking is a trust word. The specific, I believe you have what this requires. I am not demanding from emptiness, but inviting from reserves you do not know you carry. I trust you with this person's need quality of a God, whose request is the evidence of the God's assessment of the person being asked, rather than the evidence of the God's indifference to the person's depletion. Being asked by God is evidence of capacity, not evidence of being overlooked. My beloved child, this is directly connected to the title and to the specific depletion that makes the asking feel impossible. The title says this woman needs your help right now. Right now is the urgency. Your help is the specificity. And the combination of urgency with specificity means the woman's need is not a general need that any well could meet, but a specific need that requires the specific water. The viewer's specific well contains the water that only this well can provide, because the composition of the water in this well is matched to the condition the woman's need presents. My child, the asking is not God ignoring the depletion. The asking is God seeing past the depletion to the reserves the depletion does not know are beneath the stagnant surface. God does not ask a dry well to draw water. God asks a stagnant well to activate the mechanism the stagnation has been preventing, because the asking is aimed at the reserves rather than the surface, and the reserves have been full the entire time the surface has been dropping. The asking sees the reserves, the depletion sees the surface, and the reserves outrank the surface. The woman is at the well right now, my beloved child. And the specific, she is standing at the edge. The need is present. The draw is about to happen. Proximity that her arrival is producing at the well the protecting has been guarding is generating the final moments before the mechanism activates, and the reserves that have been sitting beneath the stagnant surface respond to the pressure differential the drawing creates. I need you to feel the proximity of the activation, not the distant. Someday I will have enough to give again. When the well refills, I will be able to help proximity that the depletion was producing as the default relationship between you and the possibility of extending toward anyone else's need. The present tense, the woman is here. The need is now. The draw is about to connect the surface to the reserves. The mechanisms activates in next moment's proximity of a sacred invitation, whose response determines whether the well remains stagnant or whether the draw, that was always the mechanism's activation, arrives at the well in the form of a woman whose need is the exact shape of the draw the reserves have been waiting to respond to. The woman is here. The need is now. And the mechanism activates the moment the drawing begins. My dear one, everything has been building toward this drawing. The season that took more than it gave back. The depletion that narrowed the vision to the circumference of the person's own needs. The protecting that closed the well from any further drawing. The stagnation that produced the evaporation the protecting was attributing to overuse. The surface level drop that was diagnosed as emptiness when the condition was always stagnation. The giver identity that was retired by the depletion. The grief of the former giver who could not look at another's need without the looking producing shame. The reserves that were sitting beneath the stagnant surface the entire time. And now, the woman, the specific, her need matches the well's water. The draw she performs is the mechanism's activation. God personally pointed her to this well woman, whose arrival is the sacred intersection of her need and the viewer's reserves, at a well whose mechanism has been waiting for exactly this draw. My child, the drawing is not the emptying the depletion fears. The drawing is the connecting the reserves require, and the connecting is one draw away. Type 1 draw away if the woman is at the well right now, her need present, the draw about to happen, and the mechanism that connects the surface to the underground reserves activates the moment the drawing begins, because the drawing creates the pressure differential the reserves have been waiting to respond to, meaning the connection between the stagnant surface and the full reserves beneath it is one draw away from reactivating, and the woman whose need brought her to the well is the specific draw mechanism requires to reconnect what the stagnation has been disconnecting. The drawing just began, the mechanism just activated, and the reserves that have been sitting beneath a stagnant surface for the entire duration of the protecting season are now responding to the pressure differential the drawing created. Fresh water, rising from depths the surface measurement never detected, pulled upward by the specific, drawing activated. The well is connected to its source-again mechanism that was always present beneath the well the person guarding it believed was empty. My beloved child, this is the moment. The moment the woman draws from the well, and the well does not empty further, but begins refilling from beneath. The moment the person who was protecting the remaining surface-level water from any further reduction watches the water level rise rather than fall, as the drawing pulls fresh supply from underground, reserves the stagnation was preventing the well from accessing. The moment the diagnosis of empty is overturned by the evidence of a well whose drawing produces more water than the drawing consumes, because the pressure differential the drawing created is connecting the well to a source whose supply exceeds what the drawing is removing. The water is rising, not falling, and rising changes everything the protecting was teaching. Chosen ones, this woman needs your help right now, and God is asking you. The title said asking. The trust confirms it. The title said this woman needs your help. The drawing confirms it. And the person who extended toward the woman's need from a well they believed was empty is now watching the well produce water the person did not know was beneath them. Fresh water, rising water, drawn from reserves the stagnations was sitting on top of, while the surface level was dropping, and the person was concluding the well was running dry. My child, the well was never running dry. The well was running stagnant, and the drawing just broke the stagnation. The mechanism activated. The reserves responded. And the water that is rising from beneath the surface right now is the breakthrough the prayers were aimed at, arriving not through the receiving the prayers were requesting, but through the giving the prayers never considered as the delivery method the breakthrough was always going to use. The breakthrough came through the giving, not through the receiving. And the giving is what the asking was always aimed at producing. Now that the drawing has begun, and the mechanism has activated, and the reserves are responding with fresh water rising from beneath a surface, the protecting was allowing to stagnate everything about. The empty well identity that governed the viewer's relationship with giving is being permanently dismantled by the evidence of a well whose water level is rising, rather than falling as the drawing continues. My dear child, this is what happens when a person who believed their well was empty allows a draw and discovers the drawing produces refilling rather than emptying. The empty well identity does not merely adjust. It inverts, because the empty well identity was built on the premise that drawing reduces. And the mechanism just demonstrated that drawing connects. Reduces and connects are opposite operations, and the evidence of connection is the rising water level the protecting from reduction was always preventing the well from producing. Drawing does not reduce. Drawing connects, and the connecting just became visible. My beloved child, the inversion is producing cascading effects across every area of your identity where the depletion was governing your relationship with extending toward others. The narrowed vision is widening because the rising water level is producing capacity the stagnant surface level could not sustain. The retired giver identity is reactivating because the drawing just proved the well can still supply what the giver identity was retired for believing the well could no longer provide. The shame of the looking away is dissolving because the looking toward just produced the rising water evidence that the looking away was protecting the well from the very activity the well needed to refill. The looking toward produced the refilling. The looking away was preventing it. And the breakthrough the prayers were aimed at is arriving, not through a receiving event the prayers were requesting from the outside, but through the giving event, the asking initiated from the inside. The breakthrough was never going to arrive through filling. The breakthrough was always going to arrive through drawing. And the drawing just began. The cycle of lack just broke. Through the giving, not through the receiving. Type cycle broke if the empty well identity just inverted under the evidence of rising water. The narrowed vision widening, the retired giver reactivating, the shame dissolving, because the drawing produced connection rather than reduction, and the breakthrough the prayers were aimed at is arriving through the giving, the asking initiated, rather than through the receiving the prayers were requesting, meaning the cycle of lack just broke through. The act of giving from a well the protecting said was empty, and the giving connected the well to reserves the receiving could never have accessed. Let me show you what your life looks like. Now that the mechanism is active and the reserves are connected, and the drawing is producing the rising water level, the stagnation was always preventing, because a person whose well just reconnected to its underground source operates at a supplied capacity the stagnant surface version could never sustain. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the supply. You have been operating on surface-level reserves. The specific, what is visible in the well is all that is available. I must manage every drop because the supply is finite. The surface level is the total supply economy that the empty well diagnosis installed as the governing logic of a person whose every expenditure of energy was calculated against a supply. The person believed was shrinking with every use. The supply just changed categories from surface to underground. And underground is a different economy entirely. My beloved child, the mornings change permanently. You have been waking into the managing, the first conscious awareness of each day, processing the familiar. I must conserve today. I must protect what remains. Another day of rationing a supply that is not being replenished protocol, that the stagnation was installing as the default morning operating system. Tomorrow, you wake into the supplied. The morning processes at a different level because the well is connected to the underground source, and connected wells produce a morning whose available supply is drawn from reserves the surface level rationing never had access to. Supplied mornings carry abundance. Managing mornings carried scarcity. The giving ahead of you is going to feel categorically different from the giving the depletion was preventing. The giving the depletion prevented was surface-level giving, drawing from visible reserves, whose every draw reduced the total the surface was displaying. The giving ahead is underground connected giving, drawing from reserves whose supply is replenished by the pressure differential the drawing itself produces. And underground connected giving does not deplete the giver. Underground connected giving supplies the giver through the giving. Supplied through the giving is the divine economy, and the divine economy just activated in the well. People around you are going to notice the supply change before you describe the drawing. Because a person whose well just reconnected to its underground source through the act of giving to someone else's need carries an atmospheric abundance that the stagnant, surface rationing, protecting every remaining drop version could never generate, regardless of how carefully the managing was being performed during the depleted season. My beloved child, the ones who knew you during the stagnant season, who interacted with the narrowed vision version, who received the I have nothing left to extend energy, who sensed the specific quality of a person whose well was producing the evaporation, the protecting was accelerating, while the person was attributing the dropping to overuse, when the well had not been drawn from in seasons. Those people are about to encounter the underground connected version. They will say something replenished in you. They will mean the mechanism activated. My child, there is a specific quality a person carries when the act of giving to someone else's need reconnects the giver's well to reserves. The giver did not know existed beneath the surface. The stagnation was governing. The quality is not renewed energy from rest. It is the specific. I gave from what I thought was empty, and the giving produced more than the giving consumed. The supply is coming from beneath rather than from the surface quality of a person whose divine economy just activated through the mechanism the depletion was preventing from engaging. The quality is giving-sourced abundance, and giving-sourced abundance attracts what protecting-sourced scarcity could not. Connections that require the specific atmospheric quality of a person whose underground reserves are actively supplying through the drawing are approaching the reconnected well right now. There are needs and assignments and divine partnerships whose formation demands the specific, supplied through the giving. The well refills, as it is drawn from, the mechanism's active quality that only a person whose stagnant well was reconnected through the act of extending toward another person's need can carry. My dear one, what approaches giving-sourced abundance is calibrated to the supply the underground produces, and underground calibrated connections exceed anything the surface rationing was encountering. Type giving-sourced if the reconnection is producing an atmospheric abundance the stagnant version could never carry. The specific gave from empty, and the giving produced more. Supply coming from beneath quality of a person whose divine economy activated through the drawing, and connections requiring the specific quality of someone whose well refills as it is drawn from are approaching, because giving-sourced abundance attracts what protecting-sourced scarcity was always preventing from forming. And the underground calibrated partnerships were always waiting for the mechanism to activate. I need you to understand why I asked you to give during a season of depletion, rather than waiting until the well was visibly full before pointing you toward the woman's need. Because the timing of the asking reveals something about the divine economy I always intended your well to operate on, that a full well giving could never have activated. My beloved child, I could have waited until the well was visibly full. The surface level would have been high. The giving would have felt affordable. The extending toward the woman's need would have been performed from abundance, rather than from the specific, I do not know if I have enough. The surface says, this is not sustainable. I am giving from what I thought was empty faith that depleted season giving requires. And the giving from abundance would have produced the helping without producing the mechanism's activation. Abundance giving helps the recipient. Depletion giving activates the mechanism, and I needed the mechanism activated. My child, a well that gives from surface-level abundance does not create the pressure differential the underground connection requires. The surface is high. The drawing removes from the surface drops slightly, and the slight drop does not reach the depth where the pressure differential engages the underground reserves. Abundance giving is surface to surface. The drawing removes from the visible, and the visible absorbs the reduction without triggering the mechanism that connects the well to the invisible. Depletion giving is different. Depletion giving draws from a surface whose level is already low enough that the drawing reaches the depth where the pressure differential engages. Low surface drawing triggers the mechanism, and triggered mechanism connects the well to reserves the abundance the drawing could never have reached. My dear one, I asked during the depletion because the depletion positioned the surface at the exact depth where the drawing would trigger the mechanism. The timing was not indifference to the depletion. The timing was the use of the depletion. The specific, the surface is low enough now that the drawing will reach the mechanism. The depletion is the positioning the activation requires, use that converts the season of lack from a problem being endured into a condition being leveraged for the connection the well was always designed to carry. The depletion was the positioning, and the positioning just produced the connection. The doubt surfacing right now is using the most depletion-hardened objection in its inventory. The voice that says giving from a depleted well to meet someone else's need is the specific textbook. Pour from an empty cup mistake that wise people avoid, because extending what you do not have does not produce more of what you do not have, but produces the collapse of the person extending, my child. It sounds like this. Every wise voice I have ever heard says you cannot pour from an empty cup. Every boundary-respecting principle I have internalized says giving when depleted is not generosity. It is self-harm dressed as service. Extending toward this woman's need when my own needs are unmet is not the divine economy. It is the codependent economy. And the codependent economy produces the collapse of the giver while the receiver walks away supplied at the giver's expense. That doubt just applied the empty cup logic to a well, and a cup and a well are not the same container. My beloved child, a cup is a container without a source. A cup holds what was poured into it and nothing more. A cup that is empty requires filling from the outside, because the cup has no underground connection the drawing could activate. Pouring from an empty cup is genuinely unsustainable, because the cup's total supply is the cup's visible content, and the visible content is what is being poured. A well is a container with a source. A well is connected to underground reserves the drawing activates. Drawing from a well, even a well whose surface level appears low, is not pouring from an empty cup, because the drawing is not removing the well's total supply. The drawing is activating the mechanism that connects the well to a supply the cup does not have access to. You are not a cup, you are a well. And wells operate on different mechanics than cups. The empty cup logic applies to cups. The pressure differential logic applies to wells. And God built you as a well, not as a cup. And wells that are drawn from connect to what cups that are poured from can never access. Type well, not cup, if the doubt applied the empty cup logic to the giving. And the distinction the doubt cannot account for is that a cup is a container without a source, while a well is a container connected to underground reserves the drawing activates, meaning pouring from an empty cup is genuinely unsustainable, because cups have no mechanism, while drawing from a depleted well activates the pressure differential that connects the well to reserves. The surface level does not reflect, because God built you as a well, not a cup, and wells that are drawn from access what cups that are poured from can never reach. During every season the well was stagnating. I was not beneath the reserves, waiting for the mechanism to activate, while the person guarding the well was sitting at the surface, alone processing the depletion without the God's presence beside the dropping. I was at the well's edge with you, my beloved child, present in the stagnation, carrying the knowledge of what was beneath the surface, while the person beside me was carrying the grief of what was visibly dropping on top of it. You imagined a God who was at the reserves, managing the underground, while the surface-level person was left to process the depletion without the God's direct involvement in the daily experience of watching the water level drop, without understanding why the dropping was happening in a well the person was protecting from every possible draw. I was never at the reserves during the stagnation. I was at the surface, beside the watching, through every drop. My child, being at the well's edge beside a person who is watching the water level drop, while knowing the dropping is produced by the stagnation rather than by the overuse the person is diagnosing, is the most specific form of compassionate presence the stagnation season requires. The God at the edge knows the diagnosis is wrong. The person at the edge is treating the wrong condition. And the gap between the God's accurate diagnosis and the person's inaccurate diagnosis is the gap the God carries with the specific, I cannot correct the diagnosis until the person is ready to hear the correction patience that the pre-activation season demands. There were mornings during the stagnation when the surface level had dropped to its lowest visible point, when the protecting was at its most vigilant, and the conserving was at its most aggressive, and the person at the well was most convinced the well was approaching absolute empty. On those mornings, the God at the edge was carrying the most specific knowledge that the reserves beneath the surface were at their fullest, because reserves that are not being drawn from do not deplete. Only surfaces that are not being drawn from deplete. My dear one, the lowest surface corresponded to the fullest reserves, and the God who knew the reserves were full was beside a person who was convinced the well was nearly dry. I know the exact morning the protecting became absolute, the specific day where the surface level dropped to a point that produced the specific. I will never allow anything to be drawn from this well again. The remaining water is all. I have no need outside my own will access it ever again decision that converted the well from cautiously protected to completely sealed, producing the absolute stagnation whose evaporation rate exceeded the cautious stagnations, because absolutely sealed water stagnates faster than cautiously protected water, my dear one. Not the first morning of protecting, not the most gradual. The morning the sealing became absolute, the specific day where the surface level crossed a threshold, the person at the well classified as the minimum viable supply. The level below which the person concluded no water could be drawn without, producing the complete emptying the person's entire protecting strategy was aimed at preventing. My beloved child, I know that morning because the God at the well's edge was carrying the specific. The sealing is about to accelerate the dropping. The sealing is designed to prevent knowledge at the exact moment the person at the well was performing the absolute sealing as the most protective act available. The sealing felt like the wisest response to the lowest surface level. The sealing was the accelerant of the dropping the sealing was responding to. The wisest feeling response was the most damaging treatment. Same morning, different knowledge. My child, the God who was carrying the accelerant knowledge during the absolute sealing morning is the God confirming tonight that the woman whose need just produced the first draw from the absolutely sealed well is the specific correction to the absolute stagnation the sealing produced, because the draw broke the seal, and the broken seal is allowing the mechanism to function for the first time. Since the sealing prevented any movement from occurring in a well whose survival required the opposite of what the sealing was providing. The sealing was the accelerant. The drawing is the correction. And the woman was always the correction the sealing needed. Type seal broken. If God just identified the specific morning the protecting became absolute, the surface level crossing the minimum viable threshold that produced the complete sealing, and the absolute sealing accelerated the stagnation it was designed to prevent. Because sealed water stagnates faster than protected water, meaning the wisest feeling response was the most damaging treatment. And the woman whose need just produced the first draw from the sealed well is the specific correction, because the draw broke the stagnation required to be broken, and the mechanism is functioning for the first time since the sealing prevented the movement the well's survival has always depended on. Now that the mechanism is active, and the reserves are connected, and the water is rising and the seal has been broken, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it is the instruction that determines whether the reconnected well produces the sustained supply the underground source is now providing, or whether the protecting reflex reseals the well after the first draw, because the reflex is still running inside a person whose mechanism just activated. Keep the well open. Not allow the first draw, and then reseal the well to evaluate whether the drawing produced the refilling the mechanism promised before permitting a second draw. Not extend toward the woman's need once, and then return to the protecting posture that was governing the well before the asking arrived. Keep it open. The seal stays broken, the mechanism stays active, the drawing continues, because the drawing is what sustains the connection to the reserves open, that converts the single draw from a one-time event into the sustained posture the well requires to maintain its connection to the underground source. My child, a single draw activates the mechanism. Sustained drawing maintains the activation, and maintained activation is what produces the continuous supply the divine economy was always designed to operate on. A well that is drawn from once and then resealed reconnects to the reserves momentarily, and then disconnects again when the sealing prevents the pressure differential from being sustained. The connection requires the continuation of the drawing, not a single event followed by a return to the stagnation the sealing was producing. When the protecting reflex fires, and the reflex will fire because the reflex has been running longer than the activation has been operating. Respond with the water level. The water level is rising. Rising is the evidence the reflex cannot argue against. The reflex says drawing empties. The water level says drawing fills. And the water level carries physical evidence. The reflex carries only memory. Evidence outranks memory. The water is rising, and rising water in a drawn-from well is the proof that keeping the well open is the treatment the well has always needed. Keep it open. The drawing sustains the connection, and the connection sustains the supply. You made it to the drawing, my beloved child, and I need you to stand at the well long enough to feel what it means to watch the water level rise from a well you believed was empty, while the woman whose need produced the draw is receiving what your well is providing from reserves you did not know were beneath you the entire time. The protecting was producing the stagnation the protecting was designed to prevent. Feel the rising, not the depletion, not the seasons of narrowed vision that reduced the circumference to the size of your own needs, not the protecting that sealed the well from any drawing and accelerated the stagnation the sealing was responding to, not the grief of the retired giver who could not look at another's need without the looking producing shame, not the wrong diagnosis that classified stagnant as empty and prescribed filling when the treatment was always drawing. The rising, the specific, water coming from beneath, the reserves were always there, the mechanism activated through the giving. The well is filling faster than the drawing is removing rising. That is happening right now in a well the person guarding it believed had nothing left to give. The rising is the evidence, and evidence feels like the opposite of everything the depletion was teaching. I want to thank you for something the depleted season made almost impossible to sustain. Thank you for allowing the draw. Thank you for extending toward the woman's need from a well the surface level said was empty, and the depletion said had nothing left, and the protecting said could not afford another draw. Thank you for the trust that was required to permit the drawing when every surface level measurement was insisting. The drawing would produce the emptying the protecting was designed to prevent. My dear child, thank you for trusting the asking over the measuring, because the asking was aimed at the reserves, and the measuring was reading the surface, and the reserves were always fuller than the surface was showing, and the asking always knew what the measuring could not detect. Let the tears come, not depletion tears, not stagnation tears, rising tears. The tears of a person watching water rise in a well they believed was empty, undone by the discovery that the giving they were afraid would finish them is the act that connected them to resources they did not know they were sitting above, overwhelmed by the evidence that the breakthrough they have been praying to receive was always going to arrive through the giving they were afraid they could not afford. Type rising tears if tears are forming right now, because the water level is rising in a well you believed was empty, and the tears are not the grief of the depleted season, but the overwhelm of a person discovering that giving from what they thought was dry connected the well to underground reserves. The protecting was always sitting on top of, undone by the evidence that the breakthrough was never going to arrive through the receiving. The prayers were requesting, but was always going to arrive through the giving. The asking was inviting, and the giving just produced what the receiving never could. You are not the person protecting an empty well anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one whose depleted season narrowed the vision to the circumference of their own needs, until the looking outward became a luxury the reserves could not afford. The one whose protecting sealed the well from any further drawing and accelerated the stagnation the sealing was designed to prevent. The one whose surface level measurement was classified as the total supply, when the total supply was always the underground reserves the surface measurement could not detect. The one whose giver identity was retired by the depletion, and whose looking away from the woman's need was the grief of a former giver, whose well could no longer supply what the giver's heart still wanted to extend, the one whose empty cup logic was applied to a well that was never a cup. That identity was permanently retired the moment the woman drew from the well, and the mechanism activated and the reserves responded. And the water level rose rather than fell, and the stagnation broke, and the seal opened, and the giving produced the breakthrough the receiving was never going to deliver. You are the person whose well is connected to its source now, and connected changes everything the stagnation was teaching. The empty well identity that governed your relationship with giving, your diagnosis of the dropping, your protecting of the surface, your narrowed vision, your retired giver, your shame at the looking away, the absolute sealing that accelerated the stagnation, and the wrong diagnosis that prescribed filling when the treatment was always drawing, has been permanently replaced by the evidence of a well whose water level is rising through the act of being drawn from rising, because the drawing activated the mechanism the protecting was preventing, and the mechanism connected the surface to reserves the surface measurement never detected. My dear child, you were never empty. You were stagnant, and the difference between the two is the difference between a container with no source and a container whose source was always there, but whose connection required the drawing, the protecting was preventing. From this moment forward, you carry the identity of a person whose God builds wells over underground sources, not a person who protects an empty surface from further reduction, a person whose well operates on the divine economy in which drawing produces rising and giving produces receiving, and extending toward another person's need activates the mechanism that connects the giver's well to reserves the giver did not know were beneath them, not a person whose depletion is the evidence of emptiness, a person whose depletion was the positioning the mechanism required, the surface level low enough that the drawing would reach the depth where the pressure differential engages the underground connection the abundance level drawing could never have triggered. The well is connected, the reserves are supplying, the water is rising, and the person who was protecting a well they believed was empty is now watching the water level exceed what the protecting season's highest surface level ever reached. Because the underground reserves that the mechanism is now connected to carry a supply, the surface level economy the protecting was managing could never have contained. The woman drew from the well. The well did not empty. The well connected. The connected well is rising. And the person whose depleted season convinced them the well had nothing left to give is now carrying more water than the well has ever held, because the giving activated the mechanism, and the mechanism accessed the reserves, and the reserves exceed the surface by the entire distance between what was visible and what was always underneath. Give, my beloved child. The well refills fastest when water is being drawn from it, and the God who designed the well's underground connection and sat at the well's edge through every season of the stagnation, and who pointed the woman toward the well at the exact moment the surface was low enough for the drawing to trigger. The mechanism is the same God standing at the rising water tonight, confirming that the breakthrough was always in the giving, and the giving was always the mechanism, and the mechanism was always connected to reserves. The protecting could never have accessed, because protecting is the opposite of drawing, and drawing is what wells were always designed to do. The woman needed the water, the well needed the drawing, and the God who asked knew both needs were met by the same act. Subscribe to this channel so that every time God asks you to draw from the well, the asking reaches you before the protecting convinces you the well is empty. You are not a person who protects a stagnant surface anymore. You are a person whose well refills fastest when water is being drawn from it, because the drawing activates the mechanism that connects the surface to underground reserves. The protecting was always sitting on top of. The next message carries the first rising water report from the reconnected well, and what the underground reserves produce when the mechanism is sustained by continued drawing will prove that the well was never empty, and the giving was never the emptying, but was always the connecting, and the connecting was always what the well needed to access what it was always sitting above. Type well connected if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the well was stagnant, not empty. The protecting was the accelerant, not the treatment. The surface measurement was never the total supply. The reserves were always beneath the surface. The stagnation was governing. The woman's need was the draw the mechanism required. The drawing produced. The rising the protecting was preventing. The breakthrough arrived through the giving, not through the receiving. And the God who designed the well over the underground source, and who sat at the well's edge through every season of the stagnation, is confirming tonight that you were never a cup without a source, but were always a well whose connection to the deepest reserves was one draw away from activating. And the draw just happened, and the reserves just responded, and the water is rising, and the rising will not stop, because the mechanism that connects the surface to the source is sustained by the continued drawing, and the continued drawing is what wells were always built to do.